I came back from my business trip in Tokyo to find my entire vintage handbag collection gone. 23 designer bags worth over $40,000 vanished. But when I discovered what my husband James actually used that money for, I realized this wasn't just theft. This was betrayal at a level I never saw coming. And my revenge? Well, let's just say James learned that messing with a woman who travels internationally for work comes with consequences he never imagined. If you're ready to hear how I turn the tables on a cheating husband who thought he could steal from me, smash that like button right now. And if you love revenge stories where the victim becomes the victor, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because this story has twists you won't see coming. Let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Vanessa, and 6 months ago, I thought I was living my dream life. I had just turned 26, worked as a marketing director for a luxury fashion company, and lived in this beautiful house in the suburbs with my husband James. James and I met in college. He was studying business, I was in marketing, and we just clicked. After graduation, we got married pretty quickly. Maybe too quickly, looking back. But I was head over heels in love with this guy who seemed to support all my dreams. Now, here's something you need to know about me. I'm obsessed with vintage designer handbags. Not just any bags, I'm talking about rare pieces from the 70s and 80s. Hermès, Chanel, Louis Vuitton classics that you can't just walk into a store and buy anymore. I'd been collecting them since I was 21, spending every bonus, every raise, every bit of extra money on building this collection. James used to joke that I loved my bags more than I loved him. I'd laugh it off. But honestly, these bags represented something deeper to me. They were my security blanket, my investment, my passion project all rolled into one. Each bag had a story. The burgundy Hermès Kelly I bought to celebrate my first promotion. The vintage Chanel quilted bag I found at an estate sale in Paris during our honeymoon. The rare Louis Vuitton piece I waited 2 years to find at the right price. By the time this story begins, my collection was worth about $42,000. James knew exactly how much because I had everything insured and documented. He'd seen me research prices, negotiate with sellers, and baby those bags like they were made of gold. Our relationship seemed solid. James worked in sales for a tech company, made decent money, and we split most expenses pretty evenly. We had our routine down. I'd travel for work about once a month, usually for 3 to 5 days, and James would hold down the fort at home. But looking back now, there were signs I should have noticed. Little things that didn't seem important at the time. James started going out more with his work friends. He'd come home later than usual and always had explanations that sounded reasonable. He was on his phone more, but he said it was work-related stress. The biggest red flag was probably money. James started asking me about my finances more often, not in a concerned husband way, but in a calculating way. He'd ask about my bag collection's value, about my savings account, about when I might sell some pieces. I thought he was just curious or maybe worried about our financial future together. 3 months before everything fell apart, I noticed James spending time with his brother Carl more often. Carl was the kind of guy who always had some get-rich-quick scheme going. He'd tried everything from cryptocurrency trading to starting a food truck business that failed within 6 months. Carl was charming, but he was also irresponsible with money and had a habit of dragging other people down with him. James started coming home with stories about Carl's latest business ideas, how they were going to make it big together, how they just needed some startup capital to get their amazing plan off the ground. I'd nod and smile, but honestly, I'd heard it all before with Carl's previous ventures. Then came the Tokyo trip. My company landed this huge client in Japan, and they needed someone to fly out there for a week to handle the account setup and initial meetings. It was a big opportunity for me career-wise, and the timing seemed perfect. James was supportive, maybe even a little too eager for me to take the trip. The week before I left, James was different, more affectionate than usual, constantly telling me how proud he was of me, how much he was going to miss me. He even helped me pack, which he'd never done before. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Now I know he was probably checking to see exactly when I'd be gone and what I was taking with me. I left for Tokyo on a Sunday morning. James drove me to the airport, gave me this long, emotional goodbye, and promised to text me every day. The flight was exhausting, but I was excited about the work ahead and the chance to experience Tokyo for the first time. My first few days in Tokyo were incredible. The meetings went better than expected. The client loved our proposals, and I was already planning follow-up trips. I was staying at this amazing hotel in Shibuya, working long days but also managing to explore the city in the evenings. James and I texted regularly, just like he promised. He'd send me photos of what he was making for dinner, updates about his workday, and questions about my meetings. Everything seemed normal. He even sent me sweet messages about how empty the house felt without me, and how he couldn't wait for me to come home. But here's what I didn't know was happening back home while I was working my tail off in Tokyo. The day after I left, James called his brother Carl. They met up that Monday evening, and James laid out a plan that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. See, James had been planning this for months. He knew my bag collection's exact value because I'd shown him the insurance paperwork. He knew where I kept each bag in our walk-in closet. And he knew I'd be gone for a full week with no reason to check on my collection. James had convinced himself that he was going to make us rich. Carl had this new business idea, some kind of party planning and event management company. They were going to throw these exclusive parties for wealthy clients, charge premium prices, and make tons of money. But they needed startup capital, and James figured my bag collection was just sitting there not making any money. His twisted logic was that he'd sell my bags, use the money to fund this party business with Carl, make a huge profit, and then buy me even better bags before I got home. In his mind, he wasn't stealing from me. He was investing our money to make our future better. But James made one crucial mistake in his planning. He forgot about my best friend Audrey. Audrey and I have been best friends since high school. She's the kind of friend who knows all your passwords, has a key to your house, and isn't afraid to call you out when you're being stupid. She's also incredibly loyal and has this sixth sense about when something's wrong. Audrey works in fashion too, but for a different company. She knew about my bag collection because she'd helped me find some of the rarer pieces. She also knew James well enough to sense when he was up to something. It was Wednesday of my Tokyo trip when things started unraveling for James. Audrey had stopped by my house to water the plants, something I'd asked her to do while I was away. James wasn't expecting her because I hadn't mentioned it to him. I'd texted Audrey directly and asked her to let herself in whenever it was convenient. When Audrey walked into the house that Wednesday afternoon, she immediately noticed something was off. The house was messier than usual. There were empty beer bottles everywhere, and she could hear voices coming from upstairs. Male voices, multiple men talking and laughing loudly. Audrey called out to let James know she was there, but the voices upstairs didn't respond. They were too loud and seemed to be having some kind of party. This struck her as weird because James wasn't really the type to have random parties, especially while I was out of town. She went upstairs to investigate and found James in our bedroom with Carl and two other guys I'd never seen before. They were going through my closet, pulling out my handbags, and laying them out on the bed like they were conducting some kind of inventory. Audrey stood in the doorway, shocked. James looked up and saw her, and his face went completely white. He started stumbling over his words, trying to explain what they were doing. He said they were just organizing my collection, making sure everything was safe while I was gone. But Audrey isn't stupid. She could see what was really happening. Some of my bags were already missing from their usual spots. The guys with James and Carl looked like the kind of people who deal in buying and selling luxury goods, not the kind of friends James usually hung out with. Audrey demanded to know where my missing bags were. James kept lying, saying he'd just moved them to a safer location, but Carl, who was probably drunk, let something slip about needing to move the inventory quickly before I got back. That's when Audrey realized what was happening. James was selling my collection. She immediately started taking photos with her phone. Pictures of the bags laid out on the bed, pictures of the strange men in my bedroom, pictures of James looking guilty as hell. She also started recording video, asking James directly what he was doing with my bags. The confrontation got heated quickly. James realized he was caught and started getting defensive. He told Audrey to mind her own business, that this was between him and me, and that she didn't understand the situation. Carl jumped in, trying to convince Audrey that they were doing this to help me, to make me more money in the long run. But here's where James made his biggest mistake. Instead of stopping everything right there and begging Audrey not to tell me, he doubled down. He told her that he was the man of the house, that my bag collection was a waste of money anyway, and that she needed to leave immediately. Audrey left, but not before getting all the evidence she needed. She had photos, videos, and a clear understanding of what James was planning to do. As soon as she got to her car, Audrey called me. It was about 3 a.m. my time in Tokyo when my phone started ringing. I was exhausted from a long day of meetings and almost didn't answer. But I saw it was Audrey calling multiple times, which meant something was wrong. When I picked up, Audrey was crying and angry at the same time. She told me I needed to sit down, that she had something serious to tell me. Then she explained everything she'd seen at my house. At first, I didn't believe her. I mean, James had his flaws, but stealing from me? Selling my most prized possessions behind my back? It seemed impossible. But then Audrey started sending me the photos and videos she'd taken. Seeing those images broke something inside me. My beautiful bags, the ones I'd spent years collecting, laid out on my bed like merchandise to be sold. Strange men handling my precious Hermes and Chanel pieces like they were items at a garage sale. And James, my husband, orchestrating it all. The worst part was the look on James's face in the videos. He didn't look guilty or ashamed. He looked annoyed that he'd been caught. Like Audrey was the problem. not what he was doing. I spent the rest of that night on the phone with Audrey, trying to figure out what to do. She offered to confront James again, maybe try to stop him from selling more bags. But I told her no. I had a better idea. See, James thought he was being clever, but he'd made several assumptions that were about to backfire on him spectacularly. First, he assumed I wouldn't find out until I got home. Wrong. Second, he assumed that even if I did find out, I'd be stuck in Tokyo with no way to do anything about it. Also wrong. Third, he assumed I didn't have any way to track my bags or prove they'd been stolen. Very, very wrong. What James didn't know was that I had detailed photos and serial numbers for every single bag in my collection. I had receipts, certificates of authenticity, and insurance documentation for everything. More importantly, I had connections in the luxury resale market from years of collecting. But the biggest thing James didn't know about me was how I handle betrayal. I don't get sad and cry about it. I get strategic and methodical about making sure it never happens again. I told Audrey to let James continue with his plan. Don't try to stop him. Don't confront him again. Just document everything he does. I wanted him to dig his hole as deep as possible before I buried him in it. Over the next 2 days, while I continued my work meetings in Tokyo during the day, I spent my evenings and early mornings building my case against James. I contacted my insurance company and reported the bags as stolen. I reached out to luxury resale shops in our area and put them on alert about my stolen items. I even hired a private investigator to document James's activities while I was gone. Most importantly, I started researching divorce lawyers. Because here's what I realized during those 2 sleepless nights in Tokyo. This wasn't just about the bags. This was about respect, trust, and the fact that my husband thought so little of me that he believed he could steal from me, and I'd somehow be okay with it. The bags were valuable, yes, but the betrayal was priceless in terms of showing me exactly who I'd married. By Friday, my last day in Tokyo, I had a complete plan in place. Audrey had continued monitoring the house and confirmed that James had sold at least 15 of my bags. She'd followed him to several meetings with buyers and documented everything. The private investigator I'd hired had even more interesting information. Turns out this wasn't just about funding Carl's party business. James had been having an affair. Her name was Olivia, and she worked at James's company. She was also married, which explained why they'd been so careful about hiding their relationship. But James had promised Olivia that he was going to leave me and that they'd start a new life together. The money from my bag collection was supposed to fund their fresh start. Learning about Olivia actually made me feel better, not worse. It confirmed that everything I was planning to do was justified. James hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from me to fund a new life with another woman. I flew back from Tokyo on Saturday morning, and James picked me up from the airport just like always. He was nervous, I could tell, but he was trying to act normal. He asked about my trip, told me he'd missed me, and even suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate my successful meetings. The entire car ride home, I was studying his face, listening to his voice, watching his body language. This man who I'd been married to for 3 years was sitting next to me making small talk while he had spent the week stealing from me and planning to leave me for another woman. When we got home, James immediately suggested I take a shower and relax while he made lunch. He was clearly trying to keep me away from the bedroom and my closet for as long as possible. He probably figured he had a few more hours to figure out how to explain the missing bags. But I didn't go to the bedroom right away. Instead, I played along with his charade. I sat in the kitchen while he made sandwiches, told him stories about Tokyo, and acted like the loving wife returning from a business trip. All the while, I was texting with Audrey and my private investigator, getting final updates on everything that had happened while I was gone. The total damage was worse than I'd initially thought. James had sold 18 bags for a total of about $31,000. He'd sold them quickly and cheaply because he was in a hurry to get the cash before I returned. Some of my rarest pieces, including the Hermes Kelly I'd bought for my first promotion, were sold for less than half their actual value. The money hadn't gone to Carl's business idea. Instead, James had used most of it to put a deposit on an apartment across town. An apartment where he planned to live with Olivia once he asked me for a divorce. But here's the part that made me angriest. James had also used some of my money to buy Olivia jewelry. Expensive jewelry from the same stores where I'd bought some of my bags. He'd literally stolen from me to buy gifts for the woman he was cheating on me with. After lunch, James said he needed to run some errands and would be back in a few hours. This was perfect because it gave me time to go to the bedroom and see the damage for myself. Walking into my closet was like walking into a crime scene. The shelves where my most valuable bags used to sit were empty. The careful organization I'd maintained for years was destroyed. It looked like someone had just grabbed bags randomly and left empty spaces everywhere. I sat on the floor of that closet and cried for about 10 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because I was so angry I didn't know what else to do with the emotion. Then I got back to work. I took detailed photos of the empty closet, documenting exactly which bags were missing. I called my insurance company to update them on the full extent of the theft, and I called my lawyer to schedule an emergency meeting for Monday morning. When James came home that evening, I was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, acting completely normal. He asked about my day, whether I'd had time to unpack, if there was anything I needed from the store. I looked at this man who I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, who knew my hopes and dreams and fears, who'd promised to love and protect me, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not love, not hate, not even disappointment. Just a cold calculation about how I was going to make him pay for what he'd done. "James," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." He got that nervous look again, but he nodded. "Have you noticed anything different about the house while I was gone? Anything missing or out of place?" Now he looked genuinely confused. "No, why? Did something happen?" I almost admired how good he was at lying. Almost. "I just feel like something's off," I said. "Maybe I'm just tired from traveling. But I could swear some things aren't where I left them." James jumped on this opportunity to be helpful. "Well, I did clean the house while you were gone. Maybe I moved some things around without thinking about it." "What are you missing?" "I don't know exactly. Just a feeling, you know?" We spent the evening watching TV like nothing had happened. James was probably congratulating himself on how well he was handling my suspicions. He had no idea that I was planning his complete destruction. Sunday was more of the same. James acted like the perfect husband while I played the role of the slightly confused wife who couldn't quite figure out what was bothering her. But Sunday evening, I decided to start applying pressure. "James, I'm going to reorganize my closet tomorrow," I announced. I want to go through all my bags and maybe sell some of the ones I don't use anymore. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Why would you want to do that? He asked, trying to sound casual. Well, we've been talking about saving money for a house down payment, right? I realized my bag collection is just sitting there not making us any money. Maybe it's time to cash in some of those investments. James started stumbling over his words, trying to talk me out of it. Maybe I should wait. Maybe the market wasn't good right now. Maybe I'd regret selling pieces from my collection. It's funny, I said, watching his face carefully. You used to encourage me to sell some bags? You said they were just sitting there, not earning us anything. What changed your mind? Now he looked like he might throw up. I just think you love your collection, he managed to say. I'd hate for you to sell something and then regret it later. I smiled at him. That's sweet of you to worry about my feelings. But I've made up my mind. First thing tomorrow morning, I'm going through every single bag and deciding what stays and what goes. James barely slept that night. I could feel him tossing and turning next to me, probably trying to figure out how to explain 18 missing bags. Meanwhile, I slept like a baby, knowing that his world was about to come crashing down. Monday morning came, and I got up early to start working on my closet before James left for work. He kept finding excuses to delay leaving, probably hoping to figure out some way to stop me from discovering what he'd done. Finally, around 9 a.m., James had to leave for work. He kissed me goodbye and made me promise to wait for him before making any big decisions about selling my bags. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Audrey. It's time, I told her. Come over, we're going to have some fun. Audrey arrived within 20 minutes, and we went straight to my bedroom. I opened the closet doors and started my performance. Oh my God, I said loudly, making sure my voice would carry if James had somehow hidden cameras or recording devices around the house. Audrey, where are my bags? Audrey played her part perfectly. What do you mean? They're right. Wait, Vanessa, where's your Kelly bag? Where's the vintage Chanel? We spent about 10 minutes going through the closet, documenting the missing bags and acting appropriately shocked and confused. Then I called James at work. James, you need to come home right now, I said, letting panic creep into my voice. Someone broke into our house. My bags are gone. James tried to sound surprised and concerned, but I could hear the terror in his voice. He said he'd leave work immediately and be home in 20 minutes. While we waited for James, Audrey and I set up our trap. We arranged all the evidence she'd collected: photos, videos, documentation of where James had been selling the bags. We also set up my laptop to record everything that was about to happen. When James walked through the door, he was trying so hard to look shocked and worried that it was almost comical. Vanessa, are you okay? What happened? Did you call the police? Not yet, I said. I wanted you to see first, to help me figure out what's missing before we file a report. James followed me to the bedroom and I showed him the empty closet. He did his best to look surprised, asking questions about when this might have happened, whether I'd noticed any signs of a break-in. The weird thing is, I said, nothing else seems to be missing. Just my bags. Almost like whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. James nodded along, suggesting we check for broken windows or damaged locks. He was really committing to this performance. That's when Audrey spoke up. Actually, James, Maybe you can help us figure this out. You were here all week while Vanessa was in Tokyo, right? Did you notice anything suspicious? Any strange cars in the neighborhood? Anyone who seemed to be watching the house? Now James was getting nervous. No, I didn't see anything unusual. But I was working a lot, and I went out a few evenings with Carl and some friends. Oh, where did you go? Audrey asked innocently. James started describing some sports bar where they supposedly watched games, but his story was vague and kept changing small details. That's interesting, Audrey continued, because I stopped by Wednesday afternoon to water Vanessa's plants, and I could have sworn I saw you upstairs with some people I didn't recognize. James went completely white. Wednesday? I don't remember. Maybe Carl brought some work friends over to watch the game. In the bedroom? I asked. You guys watched the game in my bedroom? Now James was panicking. No, we were just... I was showing them around the house. You know how guys are. They wanted to see our place. Audrey pulled out her phone. Actually, James, I took some photos that day because I thought it was strange. Would you like to see them? The look on James's face when Audrey showed him the first photo was priceless. It was a picture of him standing in our bedroom with my bags laid out on the bed and two strange men examining them. Can you explain this? I asked, my voice getting harder. James started stammering, trying to come up with an explanation. He said the men were actually appraisers, that he'd hired them to evaluate my collection for insurance purposes. It was supposed to be a surprise for me. Really? I said. Because that's fascinating. I'd love to meet these appraisers. What's their company name? Can you call them right now and ask them to come back so I can get their professional opinion on the rest of my collection? James couldn't answer. He just stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. That's when I decided to end his misery. James, I said calmly, I know you sold my bags. I know you used the money to put a deposit on an apartment with Olivia. I know about the affair, about the jewelry you bought her with my money, about everything. The remaining color drained from his face, and he actually swayed on his feet like he might faint. I can explain, he started to say. No, I cut him off. You can't explain. There's no explanation for stealing from your wife to fund your affair. There's no explanation for betraying someone who trusted you completely. James tried to argue, claiming he was going to replace the bags, that it was an investment in our future, that he was planning to tell me everything when I got back. But I was done listening to lies. Pack a bag, I told him. You have 30 minutes to get whatever you need and leave. Don't come back unless it's with a lawyer. James started crying then, begging me to let him explain, promising he could fix everything. He said he loved me, that Olivia didn't mean anything, that he'd made a terrible mistake. The only mistake, I said, was thinking you could steal from me and get away with it. After James left that Monday afternoon, I went into full revenge mode. But this wasn't going to be some impulsive emotional payback. This was going to be calculated, legal, and absolutely devastating. First, I filed a police report for theft. With all the evidence Audrey and I had gathered, plus the documentation from my private investigator, the police had everything they needed to press charges against James. Second, I filed for divorce and requested that all of James's assets be frozen pending the outcome of the theft investigation. But the real revenge was just beginning. See, James had been careless about more than just stealing my bags. When my private investigator dug into his activities, we discovered that James had been using his company credit card for personal expenses related to his affair. Dinners with Olivia, hotel rooms, even some of the jewelry he bought her, all charged to his employer. I made sure his boss found out about this. James lost his job within a week of our confrontation, but I wasn't done yet. Remember Olivia, the married woman James had been having an affair with? Well, it turns out her husband didn't know about their relationship either. My private investigator had photos and documentation of their affair, including evidence that company resources had been used to facilitate their meetings. Olivia's husband received a detailed package of information about his wife's activities. Olivia also lost her job and got served with divorce papers in the same week. Now, here's where my international business experience came in handy. James had been sloppy about selling my bags. He'd used online platforms, local dealers, and even some out-of-state buyers to move them quickly. But luxury handbags have serial numbers, authentication records, and paper trails that are very hard to erase. I hired a specialist lawyer who focuses on luxury goods theft, and we systematically tracked down every single bag James had sold. Most of the buyers had no idea they were purchasing stolen goods, so they were cooperative about returning them. The few who weren't cooperative found themselves facing legal action for receiving stolen property. Within 6 weeks, I had recovered 20 of my 23 stolen bags. The 3 bags we couldn't recover were actually a blessing in disguise. The insurance payout for those pieces was higher than what James had sold them for, so I ended up making money on the deal. But the sweetest revenge was what happened to James and Carl's big business plan. Remember how James sold my bags to fund this party planning business with his brother? Well, it turns out Carl had been lying about having clients and connections. The exclusive party business was just Carl's way of getting James to fund his gambling debts. James gave Carl $30,000 of my money. Carl immediately used $25,000 to pay off loan sharks who were threatening him. The remaining $5,000 got blown at a casino in Atlantic City that same weekend. When James found out he'd been scammed by his own brother, he tried to get the money back. But Carl was broke, in hiding from more creditors, and completely unreachable. So James ended up with no bags, no money, no wife, no job, no girlfriend, and no brother willing to speak to him. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The media attention from my case, a woman who systematically tracked down and recovered her stolen luxury collection, caught the attention of several companies in the fashion industry. I ended up getting job offers from 3 different firms, including one in London that came with a significant salary increase. I took the London job, but before I left the country, I had one final surprise for James. The apartment he'd rented for his new life with Olivia? The deposit he'd paid with my stolen money was non-refundable, but since he'd lost his job and Olivia had dumped him, he couldn't afford the rent. He got evicted after 2 months and had to move back in with his parents. I heard through mutual friends that James tried to sue me for destroying his life and alienation of affection regarding Olivia. His lawyer dropped him as a client when James couldn't pay the retainer fee. Last I heard, James was working at a call center, living in his childhood bedroom, and still trying to figure out how to pay back the legal fees from our divorce. Olivia moved to a different state to start fresh, but her professional reputation in our industry was ruined. Turns out, having an affair with a coworker who then gets arrested for stealing from his wife isn't great for your career prospects. Carl surfaced about 3 months later asking family members for money to pay off new debts. Nobody would help him, including James. As for me, I'm living in London now, working for an amazing company, and I've started a new handbag collection. But this time, I keep everything in a safety deposit box, and I'm definitely more careful about who I trust. The whole experience taught me something important about human nature. People will show you exactly who they are when they think they can get away with something. James thought he could steal from me because he saw me as someone who wouldn't fight back, who would just accept being betrayed and move on. He was wrong about that. But here's what I learned about myself. I'm stronger, smarter, and more resourceful than I ever knew. When someone tries to destroy your life, you have two choices. You can let them win, or you can show them that messing with you was the biggest mistake they ever made. I chose option 2, and I've never regretted it. The funny thing is, James probably thought he was being clever. He planned everything carefully, waited until I was out of the country, involved his brother to help with the scheme. But he forgot one crucial detail. He was stealing from someone who travels internationally for work, who understands how to build cases with evidence, and who has connections across multiple industries. If you're going to betray someone, maybe don't pick someone who's smarter, more connected, and more determined than you are. These days, I sleep great at night knowing that I didn't just get my revenge. I got justice. James faced consequences for his actions through the legal system. His employers found out about his misconduct. His family learned what kind of person he really was. And me? I'm living my best life in one of the most exciting cities in the world, with a career that's better than ever, and a handbag collection that's insured up to its eyeballs. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. Sometimes it's just being successful, happy, and completely unreachable by the people who tried to tear you down. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had someone betray your trust or try to take advantage of you, smash that like button to show that we don't accept being treated badly. Subscribe for more real stories about people who fought back and won. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had to get revenge on someone who wronged you? What did you do? Remember, you're stronger than you think, smarter than people give you credit for, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next story, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.